You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. We can debate the wisdom of term limits, but the impact is undeniable. 2 years ago, at this point in the campaign, the race for mayor of Cincinnati seemed to involve Roxanne Qualls, Dwight Tillery, and Phil Heimlich. Qualls isn't running because of term limits, and Tillery resigned months ago for the same reason. Phil Heimlich is still around, but this year, the field seems to include Todd Portune, Charlie Winburn, Charlie Luken, and all in a scramble to become the last person to have to worry about becoming the top vote getter in a field race. I am joined this morning by all four of those candidates. Phil Heimlich is a Republican who is seeking a fourth term on council. 2 years ago, Phil's campaign for mayor was out front, aggressive, and resulted in a sixth-place finish. This year, the talk is about winning a seat on council, not the mayor's office, and his favorite issue of more police and less crime. Charlie Luken is a Democrat non-incumbent who has been there before. After serving 9 years, 4 terms on council, including 5 or 6 years as mayor, he served 1 term in the U.S. Congress and then became the evening anchor on Channel 5. His campaign seems to harken back to the good old days, the mid-1980s. Todd Portune is a Democrat who is seeking a 4th term on council. And 2 years ago on election night, the question at the board was, where did Portune get all those votes? In the last 2 years, Todd has announced a whole host of initiatives. Charlie Winburn is a Republican candidate seeking his 4th term on council. When Charlie arrived at the Board of Elections 2 years ago in 1997, he immediately announced the fact that he was the leading Republican vote getter and a candidate for mayor in 1999. I can tell you, after being good. Charlie's neighbor for 4 years, he's never been shy about announcing goals. Okay, here we are. Welcome, thank you for being here. This is the Sunday right now. This is airing the Sunday before election, so this is pretty close to ending all of this, at least in terms of a campaign.
Dan, I got to ask you a question just off the bat. I didn't know you were Charlie's neighbor. Was he much of a partier, or did he live up to that family values image?
Much.
That
he does.
All right, okay, all right. I'm just checking. All right.
He even borrowed my picnic table for his original commercial.
That's right, in 1993. That's right.
A good Democratic picnic table.
That's right.
Phil, let's start out by talking a little bit about economic development. You and Roxanne have proposed that there be a joint private-public economic development agency created. We now have the proposal for the banks, the riverfront development. We have Andy Udris leaving City Hall. There may be an opportunity. Where are you on that? Are you serious about pushing that one through?
I'm very serious. I actually think it's probably the most important thing we can do, Dan, after the election as our first goal. Government people, and Roxanne has said this very well, government people just don't do a good job of development. They don't have the expertise to bring in housing and commercial and stores and things like that. We really need a board with a business experience to get this job done.
Charlie, and anybody can chime in once we get going here with 4 people. My goal would be to stop you guys. Charlie, what do you think about that? You're the non-incumbent, and secondly, is that an indication just another indication that people are losing faith in government?
Well, I think it's an indication people are losing faith in government when it comes to certain defined tasks. And I think Phil and Roxanne are on the right course with their proposal. You know, there's a great deal of entrepreneur spirit in this town, and those people a lot of times feel shut out of the process. We have a bureaucracy that seems to get in the way of itself way too often, Dan. And I think the proposal begins to take us into a public-private partnership that could break some of that down and really make a difference.
You would support it, basically?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the City Hall's obviously going to be a partner in it, but we've got to take advantage of all this private spirit in this town to get off the dime and get things moving, and I want to tap into that.
Todd, what do you feel about that?
Well, actually, you go back a few years before that, 1993, I think, the first time it was introduced, Charlie Winburn and I suggested
a traditional team, by
suggested in a bipartisan way coming together on a port authority, development authority type of a concept. So it's not a new idea. It's actually been kicking around for quite some time.
But in that proposal, was it to get rid of the Economic Development Department as such?
Well, not to get rid of economic development as such, but to acknowledge the fact that there are some projects that are bigger than the city of Cincinnati that should be funded by a regional base, and we need regional experience and expertise as a part of it. And not so much that, that government can't do certain things, but that we should rely on the expertise that exists in the private sector while still maintaining an appropriate governmental role to ensure that as projects are done, as we spend these mega millions of dollars, that we spend them in a way that we squeeze every ounce of good out of the dollars that are spent.
Does your Port Authority concept have a regional complexity to it that this other proposal does not?
Well, I think they're very similar in a sense, and it's not as if they're competing proposals. You have what Phil and Roxanne introduced sort of builds on the original concept that Charlie and I proposed a few years before.
Charlie, you've been around City Hall now for 6 years. We've brought up, Charlie Luken just brought up bloated bureaucracy. And that's really what this issue is ultimately about, trying to make City Hall work for developers, for any of us as citizens. What do you think? We hear complaints all the time. You've been around. What can really be done to change anything in how City Hall functions?
Well, to go back on the flip side on the economic development, I want to thank Mayor Qualls and Phil Heimlich for taking the issue that Todd Portune and I worked on.
Take credit, now move on.
Yes, I really appreciate that. But however, though, I'm recommending, this is the second time, a waste reduction commission, whereby it's appointed by citizens, and they would come in and value engineer our entire government from A to Z, and they would take a look at every department, every division, and evaluate those programs that are necessary to keep or get rid of.
Do you think there's waste at City Hall?
Oh, sure.
Then why doesn't council do the analysis and make the cut?
Well,
why do we need this commission?
Well, you do need it, because what you need to do, you need to have citizens involved. When you're talking about cutting taxpayers' dollars, they need to be involved in the process and tell us the services that they want and don't want. And we have some antiquated services.
Dan, I think that it is council's responsibility solely to make these cuts, and through the public hearing process, the public does have an opportunity to participate. But let me.
So wait a minute now. You're saying, as opposed to what Charlie Winburn said, we don't need this outside commission?
I do not believe I believe the buck stops with council in terms of making these cuts. We certainly need public input. That's the public hearing process. That's the committee process. But let me add one thing, and follow city council for the last few weeks, because this campaign has changed dramatically. We're broke. We're out of money. The fire department's got an overrun. The health department's got an overrun. And what Charles Winburn just said about getting waste reduction, whether we do it his way, my way, some other way, got to happen. This government is now broke.
Okay, let's pursue that. I just wanted, before we get off it, I want to remind you, though, that when you were mayor, you created the Smale Commission on this very same point, because you needed to borrow authority because nobody trusted City Council. Now you're saying City Council can do it. Phil, what about...
Dan, here's the problem. The problem, and I agree with Charlie on this, that it is council's decision. The buck stops with us. And here's the problem. Council has to learn to just say no. The reason is every time somebody comes to council, they usually are politically influential in the sense that they represent a lot of votes, and council keeps voting the money time after time. Last Wednesday, council voted 8-1 to give $8 million to buy out all the businesses in one particular neighborhood, just because some residents there didn't want the businesses there.
What neighborhood?
Carthage. $8 million. I was the only one who voted against it. Now, I understand
I would have guessed that.
Mr. Early, Dan, that's not true. But that money was used for Carthage to pay for and to help with the private sector, with the banks, to build 50 new homes. So Mr. Heimlich is not telling the total truth here. That was not to buy out businesses. The goal was to help create new housing development in the Carthage.
But we all know in politics, Charlie, that depending on how one casts things, you can see it differently.
Well, let's understand something. Not a dime of that is going for any housing. This just clears out the businesses, and now we're going to have to spend millions more to put the houses in.
Todd, all of a sudden it does seem like we are facing some real budget and financial problems at City Hall. You've been there. 3 of you have been there all along. How do we get ourselves into this situation? And is it serious? Like Charlie Luken just pointed out.
Well, I think it's serious, and I think that the responsibility does rest with the council to get its arms around this. I was one of the people who voted against the city's budget earlier this year. There were two of us who voted against it. But I think that the way in which the debate has to be framed is not to go out and bring 15-foot pigs down to City Hall or to criticize certain aspects of what was in that budget by making fun of kids or calling kids names in terms of related to the programs that were involved. But we have to focus on the priorities. And the reason why I voted against that budget, not that any of the projects that were funded don't do some good, because they do. But what we really have to do is get into the budget. We have to get our arms around it and make sure that that budget in every single department reflects and addresses the priorities that are facing this city.
Okay.
And that's where the buck stops, I think, with the council.
There are a lot of priorities on the plate for this city. You can look at Riverfront, you can look at the convention center, you can look at the corner of 5th and Race, you can look out in the neighborhoods. Let's just say, for example, something has to get squeezed. We can't do it all. I think that's possibly a fair guess. What is it of those sorts of big ticket items would you be willing to squeeze when the crunch comes, Charlie?
Well, if I could just add back on the Waste Reduction Commission, they would make recommendations to council. Mr. Luken is right. The buck stops with us.
What would you squeeze?
Well, you mean squeeze out?
Well, I don't know. Squeeze out, reduce, cut the new convention center in half?
No, I think what we need, we're going to have to develop a plan. And that's why I have the Winburn leadership agenda that lays out a plan.
We can read that.
And we need a strategic plan. You just cannot go in and say we're going to squeeze and cut out and pit one program against another. You must have a plan. And that's what the Charlie Winburn new leadership agenda is about, to unite these folk on council to have a plan to do that.
Phil?
Well, for example, there's an expression, the good is the enemy of the best. You have to be willing to just say no, because you won't have any money left over for important things. We don't have the money now to fund our health clinics. I voted against the $50 million for the convention center. I was the only one who voted against it. Does that mean it's not a good thing to have an expanded convention center? No, I think it would be a nice thing. I didn't think we could afford $50 million. I didn't think last Wednesday we could afford $8 million to buy out all the businesses in Carthage.
So do you still think we can't afford $50 million? When you say we, you mean the city can't afford $50 million for that convention center?
I think there are better and more important uses for the money, like fixing our roads and like cleaning our streets.
Charlie?
I think we can do the convention center if we can get partners at the state and local level. But let me hasten to add this. A study that was recently done by another candidate, Scott.
By the way, city will have to pay for it. Part of it, though.
Part of it.
Yeah.
The study recently done by Scott Seidowitz, and everybody is aware of these numbers, but he put it down in black and white. It says this: the amount of people in city employment at the bottom that are actually doing the filling the potholes, et cetera, is actually down a little bit. But the number of people in middle and upper level management continues to increase. And so when Charlie Winburn or I talk about waste reduction, or anybody talks about waste reduction, I think where we have to start is at a bloated bureaucracy. There are literally millions of dollars that can be released to do important things that people care about if we make those decisions. And I would like to see us begin to do that.
Todd, first off, do you agree bloated bureaucracy? Is that fair?
I think it is fair, and I'm glad Charlie brought up Scott Seidowitz, someone who's shown a tremendous amount of creativity and hard work in getting into the inner workings of the city administration, has provided an excellent plan. But I know he's not here, but the point is this, Dan. One of the things that I've suggested that we need to do is be about growth and development in the city, but be smart. And what we need to do is cap the increases in the city's spending on an annual basis, tighten our belt a little bit, and invest in the future. We're a big city, and we've got to be about growth and development and the creation of opportunity in our city. But one of the things that the city administration has not done a good job of, and I've suggested this time and time again to the council and to the city manager, and it kind of dovetails into what Mr. Seidowitz is talking about, and that is, as we have retirements, as people leave the employment of the city, many of them in middle management and upper management, we ought to consolidate those job functions, do some downsizing, and tighten our belt a little bit, and not automatically replace those positions.
Of business.
Yes.
Now, before you go off, Charlie, let me ask this because it's related here. Controlling the I'm aware of time.
Everybody's talking here, I said.
Is aware of time and TV. I'm aware of time. You guys are not at a council
Make sure I get
meeting
my
now.
fair
You're on
share.
my
Is that
show.
okay?
Okay.
2 minutes, Charlie.
That's all
2
right.
minutes.
Charlie,
Yes.
one of the issues about a bloated bureaucracy is always the city manager. He is the head of the city administration. There is a deferred evaluation of John Shirey coming up very soon after elections. Surprise, surprise. Where do we stand with that, and what do you think, if it's bloated and it's gotten out of control, is Shirey partly at fault, or to what extent? And what would you propose doing about Shirey?
Well, first of all, council is responsible again for the
Responsible,
bloated
but
for the bloated bureaucracy. The city manager has a responsibility of implementing the budget. Now, I've introduced several downsizing proposals. Matter of fact, along with your dad, Tom Luken, can be documented. We've introduced proposals after proposals, $64 million in the
people
middle.
introduce tons of
No,
proposals.
but we never got to support. But everybody keeps talking about bloated bureaucracy. You've got to have 5 votes. If you cannot count the 5 votes, you're not going to get anything done. $64 million in middle management right now. Now, the city manager is up for review, but I don't think that review is going to take place until after the election.
Why
and I
not?
think with the new city council, you know, we should evaluate the city manager in terms of the two additional persons that may be
Charlie
on.
makes a good point here, Dan, though, because you do need 5 votes. And I think one of the problems is whether it's a Luken plan, or Portune plan, or Winburn plan, or Heimlich plan. That's may be part of the problem here. But what I'm hopeful about is that after the election, some group of 5 people can come together around an agenda to deal with this. And the first and most important decision they're going to make is the evaluation of the city manager. That obviously is going to be determined by who gets elected. If you want to know what I feel about the city manager, I think that the city manager's performance has been weak, and I think he has failed to do the kinds of things I would like to see a city manager do. What I don't know, he would argue he has been tugged in so many different directions by a city council that he can't perform. And I think what we have to decide after the election is whether it's council's fault, his fault, whether we can get together and move forward.
Phil?
Dan, I think that what
Specifically on Shirey now.
what I was going to say is the problem with council, I think what you've seen here, it's been a little tough for people to name specific cuts. And see, that's the problem. Anytime you bring 20 or 30 people down to City Hall who want $8 million to buy out the businesses next door, or who want $400,000 for some other project, or $1 million, people just can't say no. And we have to look at the overall good of the city. We have to protect the overall fiscal position of the city and learn to say no, even when people who bring a lot of votes with them want something.
What about Shirey?
I think, quite honestly, that we gave the city manager 6 months to do certain things and to do a better job. I have to say I'm disappointed in him, and I'll tell you why I'm disappointed. One issue for me that was important was the property tax rollback, which we passed. However, he did everything he could to stop that thing, and in ways that I wasn't too happy with.
But we had an opportunity, though, in the executive session, and I can't talk about it, but we all need to be honest about this, and we know we were at a stalemate. Mr. Portune was in there. We had an opportunity to ask the city manager to leave, but the council did not have the guts to do it, and we need to be quite honest about this.
Todd, I want to do 2 things quickly, since everybody else has commented. Where are you on Shirey?
I'm not going to evaluate the city manager in a forum like this
Okay.
or publicly. I don't think it's fair to Mr. Shirey. I don't think it's fair to the process. That's the council's responsibility at the appropriate time, and that'll be after the election.
Okay. Secondly, to get to and this is for the 2 of you in the middle, the 2 Democrats. The Democrats running this time have a platform. Whew, unbelievable. In talking about getting to 5, being able to count to 5, holding people together, the Democrats, for goodness sakes, haven't been able to hold themselves together in the last decade. First off, will that platform make any difference? As I read it, there's hardly anything there that makes me jump up and down that I think would hold anybody to anything. And secondly, why would we believe there would be 5 people that hold together this time rather than last time?
Well, I think what the platform has done from the Democratic Party's perspective is it's outlined certain broad principles that everyone who has signed off on that agrees that they support in principle and in concept, and are willing to look for ways to try to implement without focus on a specific program or a specific project. And I think that's a good thing, and I think that's process, and that's part of pulling together a group who are going to be open to working with one another. Beyond that, What you have to do is identify consensus. And typically what happens on the council is you identify consensus around issues. Now, one of the overriding themes of this campaign has been, and I've been very happy to see it, an acknowledgement by a majority of those who are running, and I think a majority of those who are going to be elected, that we need to focus in on the priority areas of the primary responsibility of this municipality, that there's going to have to be some cutting back in some of the spending that the city has traditionally done, and I think there's consensus growing around following through on that.
Okay. You know, one of the things, everybody seems to be saying the same thing, but it's also election time. We have to get to priorities, we have to cut back, et cetera, et cetera. The other side of that, and you brought it up, it was the property tax rollback. Because of the reassessment of property, the city of Cincinnati, not all places, but in the city of Cincinnati, would have experienced some increase of income. And there was a great outcry and rolling that back. Was that, Charlie, was that opportunistic because we were in a campaign? Should we have allowed a certain inflationary growth to take place there?
Yeah,
Was that sensible?
I think it was very sensible, and here's why. I mean, the city continues to lose population. The rate of home ownership stinks. And if we're going to be competitive with people in the suburbs, we're going to have to show that we're just not going to keep adding and adding and adding. We're going to have to show some discipline. Now, we have talked about ways today, and I think we all agree, basically. We may not agree how to get there, but there seems to be, as Todd said, a consensus developing about what needs to be done. My problem is this. Whether the property tax rollback costs the city $2 or $3 million a year, or $3.5 million a year, I was just nonplussed by the fact that the city manager, a week or so after that was passed, all of a sudden said the city is in such dire consequences that we are broke and we need to do all these things.
So that looked like a...
That looked like, I thought he was playing games with council.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break, but stay right there. Stay tuned. After the break, we return with some more questions. Welcome back. I was having so much fun. We went way over, so we have a very short second segment here. So let me get right to it. You all had to report last week how much money you have brought in. Just very quickly. Phil, $395,000 just in round numbers. Charlie, $218,000. Charlie Luken, Charlie Winburn.
Yeah,
Charlie Luken,
not that rich.
Charlie Luken, $142,000. Todd, $129,000. Big number.
I feel like a pauper in this company.
Yeah, but the point is, they're all big numbers. The question on people's mind is, hey, we're not fools. People don't give this kind of money for nothing. They're not just donating it out of goodness. What sort of real impact does this have on you as a public servant? Phil, you're highest.
You know, it's really interesting. We had tremendous pressure, quite honestly, from almost every downtown business leader to support $50 million for the convention center. I voted against it. I was the only one that voted against it. And interesting enough, most of those people, every one I think, probably supported my campaign. I'm also the only one who voted against for over $15 million of extra spending. So when it comes to
specific votes,
point is, I voted against all the extra spending. So the bottom line is, I think I've shown the courage and done the right thing as a member of council. I don't think anybody can suggest anybody got anything for supporting me because I voted against all the spending.
Charlie?
I think the perception is wrong, what the kind of perception it sends, my amount.
It is the perception, though.
No, of course. And I agree with Phil. I don't think everybody's vote is being bought, but I think there is an access issue and a familiarity issue that the public should know about and feels uncomfortable with. I think some of the things that Todd has tried to do with campaign finance reform are on target, including limits on how much one individual can give. I violated it, though, because everybody in this campaign, it's just the money gets nuts. But I think the perception is wrong. I think we have to do something about it.
Todd, you have focused on trying to reform this. It's fallen in the courts. You going to try again?
Absolutely. In fact, one piece of legislation that we did not fail in the courts, but was repealed by a 5-4 vote by the council just in time for this year's election. And I voted against that repeal effort. But Charlie touched on it, and it's right. The bigger problem is the voter apathy and the voter cynicism and the lack of trust and confidence that people have in their elected officials and the political process as a whole. because we don't have a handle on the amount of dollars that are being contributed and the dollars that are being spent.
Charlie, this is unbelievable, but we have less than 10 seconds left. Would you support district elections to break up big money television advertising?
I think we need a combination of districts and enlarged seats. I really do.
Okay. Thank you very much for being here, and that was under 10 seconds. I really appreciate that.
Point of the campaign. Charlie Winburn,
On Tuesday night's election night, watch Channel 12 for the best coverage. Dana Eubanks and I will be at the Board of Elections, the best place to be, and start voting on Tuesday morning.